Hey guys, it's Krystal, and I did it. It is official. For real this time. I finally ditched my 16-inch MacBook Pro, and it has been quite the journey, let me tell you. I've been trying to do this for a while now because if we jump back to early last year when the 2020 iMacs came out, I tried that and I loved it, but I missed the portability of having a MacBook. So more recently when the M1 Macs came out, I jumped over to the MacBook Air, also loved it. Battery life is amazing, it's fast, it's smooth, no fan noise because there's literally no fans in that machine. That changed me forever. Unfortunately though, those 8 gigs of RAM just wasn't cutting it for me, especially when it came to Final Cut, so I find myself jumping back to my 16-inch MacBook Pro, and somehow the fan noise was even louder going back to that coming from no fans. You guys hear that? The plane is taking off. It's lifting up into the air. That is loud. So from there, knowing how M1 felt, I decided to give the 16 gig Mac Mini a shot, and that seemed to solve all my problems in terms of performance. And don't get me wrong, I love working from a desk, but sometimes it's nice to just have the flexibility of editing at my couch and my bed or even from a park. Of course, you can't really do that with a Mac Mini, so I swapped that for an M1 16 gig MacBook Pro, and that seems to have checked all the boxes. Now, before we get a little deeper into it all, I want to give a quick PSA. If you're watching this video and you own a 16-inch MacBook Pro and you're looking to replace it, yes, that 13-inch 16 gig MacBook Pro has worked for me, but if you're looking for a machine that's going to last you years and years to come, I will hold off just a little bit longer because those rumored M1X machines are right around the corner. Now, I will say I've appreciated downsizing to a smaller laptop because I love that extra portability, how it fits on my bag, how it feels on my lap, and it's definitely a lot lighter. And although that's all really nice, the 3 biggest things you're going to notice coming from a 16-inch MacBook Pro is the smaller screen, the speakers, they're good but not as good, and 2 less ports. So those are all probably things you really love about your 16-inch MacBook Pro. And I will say for me, the most challenging of the 3 is being limited to 2 ports. And I know technically there is a 4-port option, but that is Intel based. And while that will get refreshed eventually, my main point about all of this is that if you're looking to replace your 16-inch MacBook Pro, don't make that move yet. In a perfect world, when Apple drops the M1X 16-inch MacBook Pro with the rumored SD card slot, I would hope that they bring the same to the higher end 13-inch MacBook Pro. So M1X, 4 ports, SD card slot, because if I could get the same performance out of the 2, I would probably still stay with the 13-inch MacBook Pro just because of how much I've enjoyed the size of that machine. Now, a big reason I haven't really missed the bigger screen size is because it doubles as a great desktop setup. I currently have it hooked into a Pro Display, and yes, that is definitely overkill, but hopefully along with the rumored iMacs comes a more affordable display option from Apple because combined you get that iMac-like experience from a laptop. The other thing I will say is that even though there are technically fans in this machine, is so well optimized that I barely ever hear it. Like, no joke, it's quieter than any MacBook or iMac I've ever used. Right now, I'm sitting at my desk. I have my MacBook Pro plugged into my Pro Display. We have Final Cut running. I'm actually editing the video that you're watching right now. So we're scrubbing through, dropping things in. Got a couple of the programs open too. Got a little bit of everything going on right now. And there's not a single peep coming from the MacBook Pro. Like, it's completely silent right now. It's not even that warm. If you hear anything, it's my light. The light that is lighting the shot is louder than my machine. That's crazy because, like I said, coming from the 16-inch MacBook Pro and those fans, towards the end, I could not deal with the noise, especially when I was going back and forth from the M1 MacBook Air to the 16-inch. That's when I noticed how much the fan noise would get in the way of what I was doing. Because whenever they were kicking in the most, not only were they loud, but the computer would start to get really hot, the battery would start to dip like crazy. So I would literally have to plug in my MacBook, set it aside, let it chill for a bit, and then continue working. Whereas with this, I never have to do that. It was one thing to get to experience that with the MacBook Air, but the performance jump that I get with the 16 gig MacBook Pro, and the fact that this machine does have fans but pretty much feels fanless because I never hear them, makes this whole experience just that much more incredible. And I know fan noise might not seem like a big deal because I used to think the same, but it's like they say, if you know, you know. And now I know because it's nearly impossible to go back. So here's an example of the freedom that we get with this, just editing from my bedroom. We're in Final Cut, and actually the video that you're watching right now was fully edited on this machine, as well as my iPhone 13 rumors video and this Fitness Plus update that I got coming up. So I have a multicam project right here. These are full 4K clips. We're also in better quality, and as you can see, this plays smoothly. If we're jumping back and forth, it is nice and smooth. There's no stuttering going on. So two things, on my 8GB MacBook Air, you couldn't really have multiple layers or any type of stacked clips because that's when you run into those stutters and hiccups, dropped frames. So that's where these 16 gigs come in handy. And as you can see right now, it is just playing smoothly. You don't really hear anything, which brings me to my 16-inch MacBook Pro. With that, those fans would already be kicking in by now. Not only that, also the battery would start to drop like crazy. So as you can see, we don't really have any of that here. Hi, was wondering how the speakers are. Does music get nice and loud? So in a simple answer, yes, the music does get nice and loud, but it's not over the top where you'll upset any neighbors. You can still talk over it at its loudest point, but it's nice that you can crank it all the way up and still not have any distortion. It still sounds nice and clear. I will say, if you're curious to how it compares to the MacBook Air, specifically the M1 lineup, they do sound better on the Pro. There's also better microphones here. But if you're comparing it to a 16-inch MacBook Pro, that probably has the best speakers ever on a laptop. Not only do they sound nice, but it's got great bass and low end. So if you're thinking of upgrading from a 16-inch to one of these, I would hold off to the new 16-inch if that's something that you really care about. What would the battery life be like for a student using the Google suite of websites like Docs, Drive, etc., and some quick movie editing and music listening? So for a student, if you're web browsing, using Docs, or any of the Google Suite stuff, maybe some music listening here and there, you'll get pretty close to what Apple advertised. But if you incorporate editing and gaming, that's when the battery will start to dip even more. But by far, it's the best battery life I've ever experienced on any 13-inch MacBook Pro. Is the native support for one monitor only a deal breaker for a pro experience, or have you found a way around it that is not cumbersome? So for me, I've always preferred a one monitor setup. I've tried dual monitors before, and it's not something that I've needed in my workflow. I know there's certain pro apps and programs that would benefit from having a multi-monitor setup, but it's not really something that's necessary to have a true pro experience. Also keep in mind, these M1 machines are entry-level computers for Apple Silicon, and I would assume that whatever's around the corner is going to be more powerful and definitely going to have that dual monitor support. But for me right now, this one monitor setup is not a deal breaker. How do you feel about plugging it into your Pro Display XDR and using it as a desktop setup, and have you tried that yet? Yes! Sometimes, because I do tend to just take it on my lap a lot of times, but when I want to use a bigger screen, this is it. And yes, I am plugged into a Pro Display, even though this is a bit over the top. Unless you're somebody who works with HDR a lot, you definitely do not need a Pro Display to match with your M1 MacBook Pro. And as amazing as the Pro Display itself is, I think the biggest thing that I love about this setup and why I love it so much is the size contrast, like having a smaller screen for most of the time and then something bigger to go to when you're working at a desk. Because I never use these like together. Like when I'm here, I'll close it and just use the one display. How efficient is this MacBook for students in university? Can it handle like 20 plus Chrome tabs along with heavy apps? How about for programming? Should one wait for this 16-inch Apple M1X version, or can you go for this one if they were looking to buy the 16-inch Intel version? So at this point, if you can wait, those M1X rumors are looking crazy. But if you need something now, I would go M1 over Intel, but make sure you pick up that 16 gig of memory version, especially for things like coding and programming and all those Chrome tabs. Do you have the M1 Mac Mini? A comparison on the edge. And this says, So I actually was trying out the 16 gig Mac Mini before this to see how it compared to the 8 gig MacBook Air, and it definitely made a difference there performance-wise, and ultimately is what led me to trying out the 16 gig 13-inch MacBook Pro. With that said, performance-wise, they're essentially the same. The biggest difference obviously being the display on here and the portability that you get, but I will say if you already own a great display and you just want to try out M1 Life, the Mac Mini is probably the way to go because it's half the price. Love to really know your favorite thing about it. Honestly, the biggest thing is not having those fans roar at my face, and it's really the first machine that's allowed me to fully step away from my 16-inch MacBook Pro, because even with the 8 gig MacBook Air, I was still going back to it for certain things since it couldn't fully handle Final Cut the way I needed it to. But with this, I have all the power and efficiency and pretty much no fan noise. So the Switch has been a success. This is going to be my main machine until those M1 X ones come out. And really the only thing holding me back here is not having 2 more ports, and also some extra storage would be nice. But yeah, this is it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. If you missed my last video, I'll link that right here, and I'll see you later.